Hello guys, today I want to talk to you about 5 important steps you need to take in order to plan a big build like this. Now, the first one of these steps is going to be the palette, but I'm also going to talk about location, layout, scale, and sightlines, purpose, and finally, references. In order to talk to you about palette, I've brought you here to my creative test world on a very old Superflat world that I've been using since 1.14. Now, I first decided the palette for this place when I was messing around with trying to reconstruct a castle palette. So that started off with this. I realized that the two strong elements that I really liked were this pale blue and white. So what I decided to do is start building a palette out from that. You can see that at the very center of this board, there is a white and blue section here. I decided to further expand out with some reds. Red and blues always look nice. Bring in some dark oak here to contrast with the white, a little bit of brown and yellow, and some grays for some earthy tones, as well as some earthy reds and browns here. I decided to go for a couple of slightly more colorful variations on the white. So I'm going for medieval style. So you know those old Tudor Wattle and Daub style buildings? Some of those are slightly colorful, so I decided to go for a little bit of a yellow tinge with a sandstone and a bit of a pink one with this white clay here. Coming to this side, I've also decided on the palette for my furniture and my floors. So these are all things that you need to consider. If you're building a normal building, you're probably going to want to have some shutters. Most buildings in Minecraft have window shutters, but you also might want to consider the color of the furniture. If you're mostly building with some really bright stuff like this, you might want to go for something a bit more toned down, or you might want to match the brightness with something that really pops, like bright red. On the other hand, here we have some more colorful floors. So we have some stone tiles, some colorful tiles. This is based on a drawing, and I'll mention that when I get to the references later. But every part of this video really ties together. So there are 2 websites that I really recommend for figuring out your Minecraft palettes. The first one is a site called Block Colors. And what Block Colors lets you do is basically input whatever color you want on a gradient and turn it into Minecraft blocks. So you say you want blue, it'll suggest to you a bunch of blues. You say you want white, it'll suggest to you a bunch of whites. On the other hand, the website HueBlocks gives you a colored gradient. So that'll go from, say, blue to white. I used HueBlocks, for instance, when I was working on this green to white gradient. I decided to go for some dark greens all the way into the whites. It's not a perfect website, but it is a really useful tool, and I strongly recommend it. If you're building in survival, palette is really important because it tells you what kind of blocks you need to be farming. If I'm deciding to build with quartz, I gotta go to the nether. If I'm building with mushrooms, I have to get silk touch on my pick and go raid a mushroom island or something. On the other hand, if you're building in creative, it's still really useful to figure out a palette because it lets you know a lot of important things about your build. How colorful is it going to be? How detailed is it going to be? How much visual noise is there? If all the blocks I'm blending together are in a really close range, like these white colors, it's going to be pretty simple, and from afar you might not even see that there's any kind of variation. Coming back into my world now, I want to talk to you a bit about location. So location is really important. There are some ways that you can try and change the basic world generation of Minecraft through mods or data packs, but this isn't like a mod showcase. What I really want to talk to you about is finding a location that inspires you. When I picked out this location, it had a plateau that was pretty flat with some weird spikes in the earth that I totally got rid of. But I really liked the idea of the plateau, and fundamentally, the reason that this was a good location for me is because it was inspiring. I saw the plateau and I really wanted to see what a town would look like stretched across it. So the location you choose doesn't have to be perfect, but there are some things you should consider. If you're building in survival, think about whether your location is next to something like a village or a mob spawner, or if you're trying to do something like a world like I'm doing. I'm in Tredegor province here, so there's a castle just over there. All of a sudden, by having this castle here, there's a big implication about what kind of power relations are at play. What happens when you put 2 big imposing castles on opposite sides of a lake? What does that tell you about the world, about the people who live there? Are they doing that because they're super friendly? Do they hate each other? These are all questions that are going to spring out from your location. Another thing about location is starting to talk about your sight lines and your main approach. So, a good thing about art is being able to dictate how people engage with it. And I don't mean that in sense of how they find meaning in your art. People are going to find meaning wherever. But for a castle like this, say, it's really useful for me to be able to say everybody who comes to see this build is going to physically enter from about this space. So I can put the castle up there and it'll come up the same for everyone. On the other hand, if there was a door over here, or say just a road that comes along here, all of a sudden, people are engaging your art in a way that is not optimal. So your location and the way that you integrate your build into it is going to start to impact things like your sightlines and your approach. And this is where I want to talk about the third big thing, and that is your layout and your blocking. So this is going to come down to a few different things. Talking about layout. Layout is the 2D kind of blueprint of your build. So if I was going to fly up real tall here, you can see that there are some squares and there are a couple of circles, some more squares into those first squares, and then some kind of big oblong shapes. That's really important for figuring out things like distance, scale, and the way that people are going to engage with your build in terms of how they can physically walk through it. So because I know the layout of these buildings, I know that there's a street down the middle. On the other hand, blocking is to deal more with sightlines. So I'm going to show you real quick what it looks like when I walk down this city street. If we come inside here, you see that it's a pretty closed off space. And then as we turn this corner, the church reveals itself. So that gives us a nice point of interest to start walking toward. And then we see a bit of a tower, and then it opens up to the full castle. So the only reason that I know that it's going to look like this is because I've physically blocked out the spaces. I know where my positive is. My positive is this kind of space, and I know where my negatives are. My negatives are all of these spaces on the side that are framing the highlight, the big thing, which for this street is the church. Another good thing about this, and doing it this way, specifically working with your blocking and your framing, is that you can change it at this stage. If you go in with all your nice fancy blocks, you're using things like glass panes, you're using things like powdered concrete that falls all over the place, stair blocks that are tough to place because you have to get the right angle, you have to strip the wood and then you have to unstrip it or whatever. You're really hesitant to change what's already there. If I had built this whole church and then I realized that you couldn't see it above the tower walls, for instance, if it only went up to about that level, that would have really sucked and I wouldn't have really wanted to change it. But because I'm just dealing with purple wool here, I don't really care about changing the church height. All I had to do was basically cut it out, raise it a few levels, stick it back, and then go and see if it was at the right level again. Two more things I want to bring up. The first one is scale, and this is tied into the whole 3D aspect of it, as well as the layout. So what we have here is basically two large segments. We have a castle segment and a town segment. Realistically, I think I'm probably going to do a farmland segment as well. So that'll be three big pieces. And this is going to make it a pretty big scale build, at least for the scale that I usually build at. So this is a really important thing you have to figure out right away. Do you want to just build a castle? Do you want to just build a town? Do you want to just build farms? Are you trying to build two of the three or all three? And what kind of commitments do you want to make right away? In this build, I'm only committing to building two out of the three. If I feel motivated and driven at the end of this to build a bunch of farms, I can go back and increase the scale of this build to do that. But right now, I've decided on a scale that doesn't necessarily force me to build more than I feel comfortable with. The last thing I want to talk about is a specific angle. When I built Castle Leslie, I basically placed a wooden stair down to look like a chair on top of a hill, And I built the whole place from that point of view. And that's kind of what I'm starting to do here as well, because I think it's a really fun way to do things, to have a specific angle that looks really good for thumbnails and for screenshots. And if you make it accessible in your world, players, even people who are coming in survival, can come walk up to it and see like the best way to see your build. And that's a really rewarding thing. So that's something you can think about when you're deciding things like your layout and your blocking. The fourth thing I want to talk to you about is purpose. Everything I've talked about so far is pretty physical, but I want to talk about something that is more about the soul of your build. The first part is, why are you building it? And this is specifically like, why do you want to build this thing? Are you just feeling creative? Do you want to burn off steam? Are you trying to challenge yourself? If you're trying to challenge yourself, what are you trying to do different this time? For me, what I'm trying to do different this time is put a lot more emphasis into my planning, especially my 3D planning. I'm also trying to work with more interesting interiors. I'm trying to think a lot about my sight lines increasingly, and I'm trying to be more historically accurate. A lot of my builds are kind of pseudo medieval, but now I'm trying to go proper medieval. So that's one of the things you can think about with your purpose. Like, what does this actually give to you in your personal life? The other thing you can think about is, why does any of this stuff exist in your world? And this is a little bit gonna help you figure out what makes it interesting. This build here, I'm thinking of calling it Brewer's Town, and the reason is that there is a beer brewery here. So basically, they store a bunch of like hops and wheat and stuff, then they brew it in this building, and then they store the barrels full of beer over here. Over there is a guy who makes barrels for the brewery business, and this is a tavern where people can drink the beer. So it's a whole kind of ecosystem, and nowhere else in my world do I have a barrel maker or a beer brewery. So these are things that this place brings to my world. It's the reason that it exists. On the other hand, you can go smaller. For this castle here, there are a bunch of different layers. And when I was trying to figure out how high I want them spaced out, you can see they're marked out by this red glass here. I thought about what I want on those layers. So I looked at some reference images, and I found that what I wanted to do basically is make this level a kind of kitchen storage level. This one is going to be for more administrative stuff. This is going to be a bedroom. And this level here is going to be a hall where people can come meet the Lord and listen to music and feast and stuff. So I've already started thinking about some of the purposes that are going to come into this. Another way you can think about this is in professions. Now, I'm going to put a couple of resources in the in the description down below that I think are really useful. And two of those are lists of medieval professions. There's one on svincent.com, which is a list compiled by Sean Vincent. And there's one on Reddit that's pretty similar, but they cover some pretty different stuff. So I honestly recommend checking out both of them. I use both of them. But this will give you a better idea of interesting things you can put in each house. So for instance, this place here is a bakery. Which is a pretty typical profession. Most towns you make in Minecraft are probably going to have like a blacksmith and a bakery. But this one is a glass blower. So you can think about, this house is totally going to have like some awesome stained glass windows. And it's also right next to the church. So that's why the church has stained glass windows. You can see it has a nice backyard here so that the guy can come and make his glass in the back in a big furnace. And you can see that it's pretty close to the castle, relatively speaking. It's not down there with the brewery, which would probably smell like really yeasty. So by deciding the profession of this place, I figured out why it's placed here, why it's next to the church and the castle, why it's probably going to have stained glass windows, why it's going to be up here with the more higher up professions and stuff. On the other hand, this one is a knight. So the knight's place is probably going to be pretty sparse. I think he's probably, I think a knight realistically is somebody who might have a lot of money, but most of that money is in things like swords and horses and armor. It's not necessarily going to be in like a rich vase or a plant that he delicately keeps alive. The fifth thing that I want to talk about are references. I'm going to list a couple websites that I think are super useful and that I've been looking at when I'm trying to figure out this build. One is philarm.com, and those are paintings by Phil Armstrong. One is jgo.com for Jonathan Donahue's paintings, and one is bobmarshall.co.uk for Bob Marshall's paintings. And all of these are basically historical reconstructions, and I think that they're really cool because these are all really seasoned artists who have kind of recreated different parts of medieval worlds in really fine archaeological detail. And I've based little bits of this build on different bits of work from all three of these artists. References can be super useful for a bunch of stuff. For instance, figuring out the shape of a building. So for this one and this one, I definitely used references to try and figure out what kind of shapes that I liked. They can help you with the palette. So those red and blue roofs I talked about earlier, those are based a little bit on some paintings, especially the ones by Philip Armstrong. They can help you with tracing your thought process. So if you keep track of all your different references and you're trying to refine something you were thinking about a few months ago, again, this is for big projects, it can be really useful. And the other thing is, in order to give credit to artists when you do use their stuff, or when you take inspiration, and also just to celebrate artists in your community. And this is both a good legal practice, but it's also just a really good community practice, and I strongly recommend it. If you're trying to find other places for to find artists, Twitter/X is a good place. The Wikipedia Wiki Commons site is good for finding copyright-free material. And I will make a note that I absolutely do not recommend Pinterest for one very good reason, and that is that Pinterest often has a bunch of uncredited art. So if you see something you like on Pinterest, it can be hard to find the artist and find more of their stuff, but especially it's really hard to give someone credit when you have no idea who they are and when somebody is just straight up stealing their stuff. And there's just a lot of that on Pinterest, and that's why I don't recommend it as a source. But yeah, look into references, figure out what kind of colors you like, what kind of shapes you like, figure out what kind of scale you like. How big is a medieval town usually? How big do you want yours to be? All these things are things that you can come to with references. This is going to do it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to see more of Brewerstown and the progress that I make on it, let me know in the comments. I might make a couple more videos before I end up posting the tour. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe. It is much appreciated. And be sure to check out some of the resources that I posted down below in the comments. I think all of them are going to be really useful for planning your builds. But that's it for me, guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.